Commander Lee Ji-won stood before the United Earth Assembly, her military uniform pressed and crisp despite the long hours she had been working. She was 47 years old, career military, and had a reputation for putting people before protocol. Today she needed every bit of that reputation to convince the Assembly to do something that might destroy everything humanity had built. "We should offer sanctuary to the Valorian refugees," she said simply. The room erupted immediately. Assembly member Choi Min-ho was on his feet within seconds. "Do you understand what you're asking? We risk expulsion from the Council. We risk trade sanctions that could cripple our economy. We risk military isolation in a galaxy full of hostile forces. We've worked for 300 years to gain their trust." Ji-won waited for the noise to die down. "I understand the risks perfectly. I also understand that we are human. We know what it means to be cast out. We know what it means to flee with nothing but hope. If we turn our backs now, what does that make us?" The debate raged for 3 days. Politicians argued about economics, military readiness, diplomatic consequences, and practical concerns. How would they feed 12 billion refugees? Where would they live? What if the Valorians attacked? What if the Council retaliated? But outside the government chambers, ordinary people were having different conversations. In homes and workplaces across Earth and its colonies, humans discussed what kind of species they wanted to be. Kim Hyun-soo and his wife Jin-ha talked late into the night at their kitchen table on New Seoul Colony. They were simple people, farmers who grew food in the alien soil of a distant world. "The spare bedroom," Jin-ha said. "We could take in a family. Maybe 2 if they're small." Hyun-soo nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. Their farm produced enough surplus to feed extra mouths. It would be hard work teaching aliens to farm, but hard work was nothing new. Similar conversations happened across human space. Teacher Bae Yoonji in the Mars colony began learning Valorian language basics from online databases. Dr. Nam Ji-hoon in Earth's orbital stations researched Valorian physiology, trying to understand how to treat their medical needs. Millions of humans made small decisions that together formed a wave of compassion. Meanwhile, the Valorian refugees grew more desperate. Kale's fleet had been traveling for 8 months now, and supplies were critically low. The water recycling systems on many ships were failing. Food stocks dwindled. Medicine ran out. Children went hungry while their parents made impossible decisions about rationing. Vess worked herself to exhaustion in the medical bay. She had lost 3 patients in a single night, all of them elderly Valorians whose bodies simply gave out from the stress and deprivation. She stood over their bodies, her scales pale with grief, and wondered if this was how her species would end, not in glorious battle, not in scientific triumph, but in slow starvation drifting through empty space. The fleet discovered another horror when they passed through an asteroid field. Wreckage floated among the rocks, the remains of Valorian ships that had tried to mine the asteroids for resources. Council patrol vessels had found them and destroyed them all. 2,000 more dead, killed for daring to seek survival. Kyle received the reports and felt something break inside him. He had led his people to this. His pride, his anger over a territorial dispute, his brilliant calculations that had turned a star into a weapon. 3 billion Luminari dead because of him, and now his own people dying because of the consequences of his actions. Justice, perhaps, but justice that killed the innocent along with the guilty. On Earth, the vote was finally called. The Assembly gathered, each member carrying the weight of history on their shoulders. Ambassador Park Doyen watched from the diplomatic gallery, knowing that whatever happened next would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations. The vote was close. Some representatives voted no, citing the practical dangers and economic risks. Some voted yes, citing moral duty and historical memory. When the final count came through, it was 52% in favor. Humanity would offer sanctuary to the Valorians. The announcement went out across all channels. Within hours, the Galactic Council responded. The message was cold and clear. Any human ships aiding the Valorians would be fired upon. Humanity had 1 week to rescind the decision or face severe consequences, including economic sanctions, trade restrictions, and possible expulsion from the Council. The human government did not rescind the decision. Commander Ji-won received her orders the next day. She was to take command of a fleet, find the Valorian refugees, and bring them to human space. 200 ships would accompany her, a mixture of military vessels and converted civilian craft. It was the largest humanitarian mission humanity had ever attempted. Jiwan stood on the bridge of the UNES Indomitable and looked at her crew. They were young and old, experienced and new, but all of them had volunteered. Every single person on every ship in the fleet had chosen to be here, knowing the risks. "We're going to bring them home," she told her crew, "no matter what stands in our way." The fleet launched from Earth orbit, their engines blazing as they accelerated toward deep space. They carried food, medicine, repair equipment, and most importantly, hope. The journey to find the Valorian refugees would take 3 weeks of hard travel through uncharted space. On New Seoul Colony, Kim Hyun-soo and Bae Jinha watched the launch on their living room screen. They had already prepared their spare bedroom and stocked alien-compatible food supplies. They were ready to welcome strangers into their home. Across human space, millions of others did the same. Planets prepared housing, factories converted production lines to manufacture Valorian-compatible equipment, schools developed integration programs, hospitals trained in alien medicine. Humanity mobilized not for war but for compassion. The Galactic Council watched in confusion and growing alarm. This made no sense. Species did not sacrifice economic advantage for moral principles. They did not risk their standing for outcasts. They did not choose compassion over self-interest. The Council had studied humanity for centuries, had tested them thoroughly before granting membership. They thought they understood these strange primates from the small blue planet. They were wrong. The Council convened an emergency session. Some species argued for immediate military action against humanity. Others counseled patience, wanting to see if the humans would back down when faced with real consequences. The insectoid creche, known for their rigid adherence to law, demanded humanity's expulsion. But the luminary representative, Speaker Hillmon, surprised everyone. She stood before the council, her wings shimmering with bioluminescent patterns of grief and memory. "My people lost 3 billion souls to Valorian aggression. We carry scars that will never heal. But I have been watching the humans. They are not forgiving the crime. They are not forgetting the dead. They are simply choosing to see the innocent among the guilty. They are choosing mercy alongside justice. Perhaps we should watch and learn before we judge." Her words created uncertainty in the council. Some species began to question whether punishing humanity was wise. Others remained firm in their conviction that the law must be upheld. While the council debated, G1's fleet traveled deeper into space. They followed the tracking signals left by the Valorian exodus, following the trail of desperate refugees fleeing into darkness. The fleet pushed their engines hard, racing against time, knowing that every day of delay meant more Valorians would die. On the 17th day of travel, they made contact. The Valorian fleet appeared on their sensors, thousands of ships drifting through space, many of them barely functional. Jiwan opened a communication channel, broadcasting on all Valorian frequencies. "This is Commander Lee Jiwan of the United Earth Space Forces. We have come to help you. We are offering sanctuary in human space. No conditions, no payment required. We're here because it's the right thing to do." On the Valorian flagship, Kale stared at the message in disbelief. It had to be a trick, a council trap designed to gather them together for easy destruction. No one helped anyone in the galaxy without demanding something in return. "Why?" he transmitted back. "Why would you help us?" Jiwan's response was simple. "Because we're human. We've been where you are. We remember." Admiral Yoon Taijin was 64 years old and had never disobeyed an order in his entire military career. Today, commanding the UNES Indomitable and its escort fleet, he was disobeying the entire Galactic Council. The weight of that decision sat heavy on his shoulders, but his conscience felt surprisingly light. The human fleet had finally reached the Valorian refugees after 3 weeks of hard travel. What they found shocked even the most experienced officers. The Valorian ships were falling apart. Hull breaches showed through temporary patches. Life support systems functioned at barely 40% capacity. Thousands of people crowded into spaces meant for hundreds. Kyle had initially refused to believe the human offer was genuine. He suspected a council trap, some elaborate scheme to gather the Valorians together for easy elimination. But as human ships began pulling alongside Valorian vessels, transferring food and medicine, that suspicion started to crack. Commander Lee Ji-won personally led the relief effort. She organized teams to board the most damaged Valorian ships and begin emergency repairs. Human engineers worked side by side with exhausted Valorian technicians, using hand signals and hastily programmed translation devices to communicate. Engineer Shindeho boarded a Valorian hospital ship that housed 2,000 children. The life support was failing, the temperature dropping toward lethal levels. He worked for 36 hours straight, sleeping in brief snatches while his hands repaired circuits and replaced damaged components. When the systems finally stabilized and warmth flooded back through the ship, the Valorian medical staff wept with relief. Vess met human doctors for the first time when they came aboard her medical section. Dr. Nam Jihoon introduced himself carefully, using basic Valorian phrases he had learned. He brought medical supplies, diagnostic equipment, and most importantly, he brought respect. He asked questions, learned about Valorian physiology, and worked alongside her as an equal colleague rather than a superior offering charity. The human fleet distributed supplies across the Valorian ships. Food compatible with Valorian biology, water purification systems, spare parts for engines and life support, blankets and clothing, medicine and medical equipment. Everything they had brought they shared freely. Kale stood on his bridge and watched it happen, unable to fully process what he was seeing. Species did not do this. Nations did not sacrifice their own resources for strangers, especially not for criminals, for outcasts, for a people who had attempted genocide. This violated every rule of galactic politics he understood. Then the Council forces arrived. 6 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and took up positions blocking the path to human space. They were led by Admiral Tickthor, an insectoid creche whose species believed absolutely in the rule of law. His ships outgunned the human fleet by a factor of 3 to 1. Any fight would be brutally one-sided. Tickthor's message was clear and cold. Human fleet, you are in violation of Council law. Abandon the Valorian criminals immediately and return to your territory. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. On the Indomitable's bridge, young officer Han Soo-young watched her tactical display with barely controlled fear. She was 26 years old, fresh out of the academy, and this was her first real deployment. She had imagined many scenarios during training, but never this. Never facing down superior forces to protect refugees that her government had been ordered to abandon. Admiral Yoon Tae-jin studied the tactical situation calmly. 6 Council warships against 200 human vessels. The Council ships had better weapons, better shields, better everything. But they had to be willing to use those advantages. He opened a channel directly to Tickthor. We're taking these people home, Yoon said simply. Move aside or make your peace with whatever gods you believe in. The ultimatum hung in space between the 2 fleets. Weapon systems activated on both sides, shields powered up to maximum. Targeting computers locked onto their designated enemies. One trigger pull, one nervous mistake, and the shooting would start. 7 hours passed in tense silence. On the human ships, crews sat at battle stations, hands sweating, hearts pounding. On the Valorian ships, families huddled together, knowing that a battle around them would tear their fragile vessels apart. Children cried. Adults prayed in a dozen different languages. Kale watched from his bridge, unable to do anything. His people had no weapons, no way to defend themselves or the humans who had come to help them. If the shooting started, they would die. But they would die knowing that someone had cared, that someone had tried, that somewhere in the cold galaxy there existed a species capable of compassion. In the Council fleet, Admiral Tickthor faced an impossible decision. His orders were clear. Enforce the law. Prevent the humans from aiding the Valorians. Use force if necessary. He had never questioned orders before. The law was the law, absolute and unchanging. But as he watched the human ships maintaining their protective formation around the Valorians, as he saw the clear determination in Admiral Yoon's transmission, something troubled him. The humans knew they would lose a fight. They knew they were risking everything. And yet they stood firm. Tickthor could not understand it. No species acted this way. Logic dictated self-preservation, advantage-seeking, rational calculation of costs and benefits. The humans were being illogical, irrational, and utterly consistent in their irrationality. After 7 hours, Tickthor made a decision that would haunt him for years. He ordered his fleet to withdraw, not because he feared defeat, because victory was certain, not because he agreed with the humans, because he believed absolutely in the law. He withdrew because he could not comprehend what he was seeing, and destroying something incomprehensible felt wrong in ways he could not articulate. The Council ships pulled back, their weapons powering down. They did not leave the area completely, but they cleared a path. Admiral Yoon did not waste time questioning the reprieve. He ordered the combined fleet to begin moving toward human space immediately. The journey took 2 weeks. The human ships moved slowly, matching pace with the damaged Valorian vessels, stopping when repairs were needed, never abandoning the weakest ships to speed the journey. Engineer Shindeho and his teams worked around the clock, moving from ship to ship, fixing what could be fixed and reinforcing what could not. Vess worked alongside human medical personnel, treating the sick and injured from both species. She learned that humans felt pain similarly to Valorians, that their blood was red instead of blue but served the same purpose, that their children laughed and cried in the same ways. The differences between them seemed smaller with each passing day. News of the standoff spread across the galaxy. The story of humans facing down superior force to protect refugees captured imaginations even among species that had voted for the Valorian banishment. Some called it foolish, some called it inspiring, but everyone was talking about it. The Luminari issued an official statement through Speaker Hilmon. We do not forgive the Valorians for their crime against our people. 3 billion souls cry out for justice, and that cry will never be silenced. But we have watched humanity choose mercy alongside justice. We have seen them risk everything for principles they could have abandoned at no cost to themselves. We acknowledge this and we will remember it. That statement cracked something in the Council's unity. If the Luminari who had lost the most could acknowledge humanity's actions with respect, how could others maintain pure condemnation? 3 other species quietly contacted human diplomats requesting private meetings. They did not publicly support humanity's actions, but they wanted to understand. They asked questions: why? What did humans gain? How could they justify the risk? Ambassador Park Doyen answered honestly. We gain nothing material. We justify it by looking in the mirror each morning and being able to live with what we see there. That's all. The combined fleet finally entered human space. New Sol Colony had volunteered to receive the first wave of refugees. As the Valorian ships approached the agricultural world, they could see preparations on the surface. Temporary housing spread across empty fields. Distribution centers stood ready with supplies. Medical facilities had been expanded and staffed. Kim Hyun-soo and Bai Jinha stood at the spaceport with thousands of other volunteers. They held signs in Valorian script, hastily made but heartfelt, saying welcome and you're safe now. Around them, other humans waited nervously, excited, scared, and determined. The first Valorian ship landed. Its boarding ramp extended. A family emerged, scales dull from malnutrition and stress, carrying everything they owned in small bags. They looked around at the alien world, at the strange bipedal creatures waiting for them, and did not know what to expect. Hyun-soo stepped forward. He had practiced this moment in his mind 100 times. Using carefully learned Valorian phrases, he said, "Welcome to New Sol. We have prepared a place for you. You're home now." The Valorian father, a mathematician named Seer who had calculated stellar mechanics before the Exodus, broke down and cried. His wife held their children close. They had expected death in cold space. They had prepared themselves for the end. Instead, they found hands reaching out to help them up. Across the spaceport, the same scene repeated thousands of times. Human families greeting Valorian families. Awkward attempts at... Part 1. The courtroom stretched wide across the space station, its walls made of transparent metal that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from 47 different alien species sat in their designated seats, watching the trial unfold. The air felt heavy with tension, the kind that pressed down on everyone present. Kyle stood in the center of the room, his reptilian body covered in dark green scales that had lost their shine over the past months. Beside him stood Vess, her scales a duller shade of emerald. They were scientists, respected across the galaxy for their work in mathematics and physics. Now they stood accused of the worst crime imaginable. The charges read aloud by the council speaker were clear and brutal. The Valorians, Kale species, had attempted to weaponize a star. Their target was the Luminari homeworld, a planet inhabited by moth-like beings who glowed with soft bioluminescence. The weapon had been stopped before full deployment, but not before a massive solar flare erupted from the star. 3 billion Luminari died in moments, burned by radiation or flash-frozen when their protective atmosphere stripped away. The evidence could not be disputed. Data logs, communication records, and physical proof all pointed to Valorian guilt. Kale had led the project. Vess had performed the calculations. They had done this because their species lost a territorial dispute over a mineral-rich asteroid belt. Pride and desperation had driven them to attempted genocide. Park Doyen sat in the human delegation section, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. He was 62 years old with silver streaking through his black hair and lines etched deep around his eyes. For 30 years, he had served as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, working tirelessly to build humanity's reputation among the stars. His people had only been accepted into the Council 80 years ago, after centuries of observation and testing. The vote came quickly. Each species representative pressed their decision into the digital system. The results flashed across the screens. 46 votes for total banishment. 1 abstention. The speaker announced the verdict. Every Valorian across all 47 star systems must leave Council space within 1 year. No member species could offer aid, shelter, resources, or even basic supplies. Any violation would result in immediate expulsion from the Council and possible military action. The Valorians were to be erased from civilized space. Doyen had abstained. His hand had hovered over the voting panel for a long moment before pulling back. He could not vote yes, but he also could not vote no without proof of a better path forward. The other ambassadors stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. The Luminari representative, Speaker Hillmon, looked at him with eyes that still held tears for her lost billions. Kale and Vess were escorted from the courtroom. Within hours, the order went out to all Valorian worlds. The reaction was immediate chaos. 12 billion Valorians lived across 17 colonized planets and hundreds of space stations. They had 1 year to gather everything they could carry and leave. Doyen watched the news feeds from his quarters that night. Valorian families packed belongings into cargo containers. Children cried as they were pulled from schools. Scientists deleted research from laboratory computers, knowing the Council would seize everything left behind. Ships of all sizes prepared for departure, from massive colony vessels to small personal craft. The exodus began within weeks. The Valorian homeworld launched the first fleet, 30,000 ships carrying nearly 1 billion people. They headed toward the galactic rim, toward uncharted space where the Council's authority did not reach. Other fleets followed from other worlds, creating streams of lights across space as millions fled. Kyle found himself commanding a fleet of 200,000 refugees. He stood on the bridge of a repurposed cargo hauler, now serving as a flagship for people who had lost everything. The ship's computers showed him the path ahead, into cold and empty space where no established trade routes existed, where no friendly ports awaited. Vess worked in the medical section, treating people for stress-related illnesses and injuries from hasty packing. She had been a theoretical physicist, solving equations that described how reality bent and folded. Now she bandaged cuts and distributed sleeping medication to families crowded into cargo holds. Back on Earth, Doyen filed his report with the United Earth Assembly. He described the trial, the verdict, and his decision to abstain. The Assembly members listened in silence. When he finished, they asked him one question. Did he think humanity should get involved? Doyen looked at the faces around the conference table. These were leaders from every continent, every major city and colony. They had worked for generations to reach this point, to be accepted as equals among the galactic powers. Getting involved with the Valorians could throw all of that away. I think, Doyen said slowly, that we need to remember our own history. We have been refugees. We have been persecuted. We have been the ones fleeing in ships hoping someone would take us in. The Assembly adjourned without making a decision. They needed time to think, to consult with their constituents, to weigh the enormous risks against the moral imperatives. Meanwhile, the Valorian exodus continued. Not all fleets made it safely into deep space. Some were attacked by pirates who knew the refugees carried valuable technology and resources. Others suffered mechanical failures, their ships breaking down without access to proper repair facilities. Council patrol vessels tracked their movements, ensuring they truly left controlled space. 8 months into the journey, Kale's fleet encountered something that changed everything. They found wreckage. 40 Valorian ships floated dead in space, their hulls torn open by weapons fire. Kale sent recovery teams to investigate. What they found made his blood run cold. The ships had tried to settle on a barren moon in unclaimed territory. They had begun establishing temporary shelters when Council patrol ships arrived. and destroyed them without warning. The message was clear. There would be no mercy, no exception, nowhere to hide. Vess examined the bodies they recovered. Men, women, children, all killed for the crime of seeking shelter. She worked through the night, documenting everything, her hands shaking as she sealed each body in a preservation container. These were her people, murdered for daring to rest. Kyle made a decision then. He sent a message out into space, a desperate plea transmitted on all frequencies. The message was simple: we are dying. Our children are starving. We accept responsibility for our crimes, but we beg for mercy. Is there anyone listening who remembers what compassion means? The message traveled through space at light speed, reaching thousands of worlds. Most ignored it. Some laughed at the audacity. A few felt pity but did nothing, bound by council law. But on Earth, in a small apartment in the city of New Seoul, a farmer named Kim Hyun-soo heard the message translated into Korean on the evening news. His wife, Bae Jin-ha, sat beside him. Their teenage son asked a simple question that would echo through history. If they came here, would we help them? Hyun-soo and Jin-ha looked at each other. They both knew the answer, felt it deep in their hearts where morality lived beyond politics and fear. Yes, they would help. The question was whether their government would do the same. Across Earth, billions of humans heard the same message and asked themselves the same question. The debate began in homes, in workplaces, in government chambers, and in the streets. Humanity stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between safety and conscience, between self-interest and compassion. The Valorians continued their desperate journey into darkness, not knowing that their message had planted a seed, not knowing that one species in all the galaxy was seriously considering the impossible, reaching out their hands to help those whom everyone else had condemned to death. 12 million Valorians were resettled across 30 human worlds over the next 6 months. It was the largest refugee integration effort in human history, and it was far from smooth. Nothing about it was easy. Park Yoon-ji worked as a social worker on Mars Colony, helping traumatized Valorian children adjust to their new lives. She spent her days in schools, in temporary housing centers, in hospitals where young minds struggled to process what they had been through. A 7-year-old Valorian named Kira refused to sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cold of space where her sister had died during the Exodus. Yoon-ji sat with Kira night after night, learning Valorian lullabies from database recordings, holding the child's clawed hand, promising that she was safe now. Progress came slowly, measured in small victories like Kira sleeping for 3 hours, without nightmares or smiling at a joke or playing with human children during recess. Not everyone welcomed the refugees. On Mars Colony, protests erupted outside the temporary housing centers. Angry humans waved signs reading, "They're murderers" and "Send them back." The fear and anger were real, justified by the deaths of 3 billion Luminari. Governor Kwon Sang-woo faced the protesters directly. He stood on a platform outside the colony administration building and projected holographic images above the crowd. Images from Earth's 21st century. Refugee camps, drowned children, on beaches, families behind border fences, turned away boats sinking in oceans. The darkest chapters of human history when people had looked away from suffering because fear seemed safer than compassion. "We were them once," Sang-woo said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Every single one of our ancestors was a refugee from something. War, famine, disaster, persecution. We survived because someone, somewhere, opened their arms when they could have closed their fists. Yes, the Valorians committed a terrible crime. Yes, the guilty must answer for that. But these refugees are not all guilty. These children did not weaponize a star. We can be angry at the crime and still compassionate toward the innocent. That's what separates justice from revenge." The protests continued, but they grew smaller. Slowly, painfully, minds began to change, not everyone's. Some humans would always see the Valorians as dangerous criminals, but enough people chose to try, chose to help, chose to build bridges instead of walls. The integration brought unexpected benefits. Valorian engineers applied their mathematical genius to human terraforming projects. Dr. Vess collaborated with human researchers, combining their different approaches to medicine. Kyle, stripped of his former status but still brilliant, began working with human physicist Dr. Han Minwoo on quantum field theory. They made an unlikely pair. Minwoo was quiet and methodical, working through problems with patient persistence. Kyle was intense and intuitive, seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. Their first meetings were awkward, conducted through translation software with significant lag. But mathematics was a universal language, and quantum mechanics did not care about species. Together, they developed revolutionary shielding technology that could deflect energy weapons far more effectively than anything previously designed. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when both of them were exhausted and running on coffee and Valorian stimulants. Kale sketched an equation on a digital board. Minwoo stared at it, added 2 terms, and suddenly the mathematics clicked into place like a lock opening. They sat in silence for a moment, realizing what they had discovered. Then Minwoo started laughing, a tired, slightly hysterical sound. Kale made a hissing sound that was the Valorian equivalent of laughter. 2 scientists from different worlds, building something new together. On New Sol Colony, integration happened at a more personal level. Kim Hyun-soo and Bai Jinha had taken in a Valorian family, Seer the mathematician, his partner Vel, and their 2 children. The children, Tiro and Misa, attended school with the Kim's son, Junwoo. The first day was difficult. Tiro and Misa did not understand Korean or English well yet. Human children stared at their scales and claws. Some kids whispered and pointed. But Junwoo sat with them at lunch, sharing his food and teaching them words. "Friend," he said, pointing to himself. "Friend," they repeated in their hissing voices. Within a month, Tiro and Junwoo were inseparable. They played strategy games together, communicated in a mix of Korean, Valorian, and made-up words that only they understood. When other kids teased Tiro about his appearance, Junwoo stood up for him. When Junwoo struggled with advanced mathematics, Tiro's father Seer tutored him patiently. In the evenings, both families shared meals at a table that was too small for everyone. Hyun-soo taught Seer about farming while Vel taught Jinha about Valorian food preparation. The adults laughed at communication mishaps and marveled at how similar their concerns were. Both species worried about their children's futures, worked hard to provide for their families, and dreamed of peace. But the integration came at a cost for humanity. The Galactic Council imposed harsh sanctions. Human ships were barred from 40% of Council space. Trade agreements were suspended. Economic partners cut ties. Humanity's economy contracted by 8% in the first year. Businesses failed. Jobs were lost. People suffered real hardship. Translator. Oh Suman worked himself to exhaustion facilitating communication between species. He spent 18-hour days in government offices, hospitals, schools, and workplaces, helping humans and Valorians understand each other. He barely slept, surviving on stimulants and determination. His family worried about him, but he insisted he was fine. The sanctions hit hardest in the outer colonies. New Busan, a mining colony that had depended on trade with Council species, saw unemployment rise to 20%. Families struggled to afford basic supplies. Some colonists blamed the Valorians for their suffering, though logically they knew the Council's sanctions were the real cause. Governor of New Busan, Lee Min-jae, held town halls where angry colonists demanded answers. Why should they suffer for aliens they had never met? Why should their children go hungry so refugees could eat? The questions were fair, the anger understandable. Minji could only answer honestly. Because it's right. Because we choose to be the kind of species that helps rather than abandons. Because we believe that morality matters more than money. I know that sounds hollow when your family is struggling. I know words don't fill empty stomachs. But I also know that if we sent the Valorians away to save ourselves hardship, we would lose something more valuable than wealth. We would lose our humanity. Not everyone accepted that answer. Some colonists remained bitter, but most found ways to endure, to adapt, to survive the economic pressure. Humans had weathered storms before. They would weather this one too. On the 1-year anniversary of the Valorians' arrival, Ambassador Park Doyon returned to the Galactic Council chamber. He looked older now, more tired, but his eyes held firm resolve. He stood before the assembled species and addressed them directly. "You wanted to know what kind of species humanity is," he said. "You spent 3 centuries watching us before granting membership. You tested our technology, our ethics, our worthiness. Now you know. We are the species that opens its arms when others close their hearts. We are the species that chooses compassion over convenience. Expel us if you must. Sanction us as you have. We will not abandon those who need us." The council chamber fell silent. Some species looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. A few looked thoughtful. The vote was called on whether to expel humanity from the council entirely. It was the nuclear option, the ultimate punishment. If humanity was expelled, they would be completely isolated, cut off from all galactic trade, vulnerable to aggression from hostile forces. The vote failed, not by much. 30 species voted for expulsion. 17 voted against. But 3 species abstained, and in council law, abstentions counted as no votes. Humanity remained in the council, though still under heavy sanctions. More significantly, 5 species requested private meetings with human diplomats. They wanted to understand. They wanted to know how humanity maintained this position despite the costs. Some of them were considering whether the council's approach to the Valorian situation had been too harsh. On New Sol, Kim Hyun-soo's farm prospered despite the sanctions. Sear had applied his mathematical genius to crop optimization, increasing yields by 20%. Vel had introduced Valorian farming techniques that worked surprisingly well in the colony's soil. The 2 families worked side by side in the fields, their children playing between the rows of growing plants. Junwoo and Tiro lay in the grass one evening, looking up at the stars. 2 different species, 2 different backgrounds, but in that moment just 2 friends sharing wonder at the universe. "Which star is your homeworld?" Junwoo asked. Tiro pointed to a faint light on the horizon. "That one. I'll never see it again." "I'm sorry," Junwoo said quietly. "Don't be," Tiro replied. "This is home now. Home is where someone wants you." The war started without warning, 5 years after humanity had taken in the Valorian refugees. The Karathi Union, an aggressive empire from the Galactic East, launched massive attacks across council space. 6 species fell in the first month, their worlds conquered or destroyed before anyone could mount an effective defense. The Karathi had been building their military in secret for decades. Their weapons technology was years ahead of anything the council possessed. Their energy weapons cut through council shields like they were made of paper. Their tactics were brutal and efficient. Panic spread through the galaxy as species that had felt safe for centuries suddenly faced extinction. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Military commanders presented devastating reports. The Karathi were advancing on multiple fronts. Traditional defenses were failing. At the current rate of advance, 12 more species would fall within 6 months. Something had to change, and quickly. The Council did something unprecedented. They sent a delegation to Earth. The same council that had sanctioned humanity for 5 years now came asking for help. Specifically, they needed the quantum shielding technology that Dr. Han Minwoo and Kale had developed together. Admiral Yoon Taejin received the council delegation. In his office aboard the orbital defense station above Earth, he was 69 years old now, gray-haired and carrying the weight of years of service. The council representatives sat across from him, some of them the same individuals who had voted to expel humanity just 5 years ago. The irony was not lost on Yoon. He could refuse. It would be justified. Sweet revenge for the insults, the sanctions, the isolation. He could let the council face the Karathi alone and watch them learn the same lesson they had tried to teach humanity about the cost of standing alone. Instead, he asked one simple question. "Will you lift the sanctions against the Valorians?" The council representatives exchanged glances. Some species still feared and hated the Valorians. The wounds from their attempted genocide were still raw, but the luminary representative, Speaker Hillmon, spoke up. She looked older now, her wings showing signs of age, but her voice remained strong. "My people lost 3 billion souls to Valorian aggression. We carry scars that will never heal. Our children grow up knowing the horror of what was done to us. But we have watched humans and Valorians build something new together. We have seen cooperation replace hatred, partnership replace fear. The Valorians have not been forgiven. But they have been given a chance to be something better than they were. If humanity will help us now, I will advocate for full Valorian rehabilitation. The vote passed. The sanctions ended. All restrictions on Valorian movement and rights were lifted. It was not justice for the Luminari dead, but it was a choice to build a future rather than remain trapped in the past. The human Valorian Joint Fleet deployed to the front lines within 2 weeks. Admiral Yoon commanded the overall operation. Commander Lee Jiwon, now promoted to captain, led tactical coordination with Kyle as her chief science advisor. Engineer Shin Dae-ho commanded a destroyer. Dr. Vess served as chief medical officer for the expeditionary force. The fleet numbered 500 ships, a mixture of human military vessels and converted Valorian civilian craft. They carried the new quantum shields, installed in hasty retrofits during the journey to the front. The shields were untested in real combat conditions. Everything depended on mathematics worked out in late-night sessions by a human and a Valorian working together. The first major battle occurred at the Threshold Gate, a strategic choke point between Council space and the core systems. The Karathi threw everything they had at it, knowing that losing the gate would slow their advance significantly. 30 Karathi battleships faced the joint human-Valorian fleet. The battle was brutal. Karathi weapons tore into the joint fleet, but the quantum shields held. Energy beams that should have destroyed ships instead deflected harmlessly into space. The Karathi commanders could not understand what they were seeing. Their superior technology was being countered by something they had never encountered, but the battle still cost lives. The destroyer UNS Seoul took a direct hit to its engines and exploded, killing all 300 crew members. Among the dead was Osuman, the translator who had worked himself to exhaustion building bridges between humans and Valorians. He had volunteered for the mission, insisting his language skills would be needed. Engineer Shin Dae-ho watched the Soul's destruction on his tactical display and felt something break inside him. Suman had been his friend, his colleague, someone who believed in the same things he believed in. Now he was gone, sacrificed in a war to protect species that had treated humanity with contempt for years. But Dae-ho did not withdraw. He pushed his ship harder, coordinated his attacks more effectively, and fought with everything he had, not for the Council but for the principle that the innocent should not suffer for the guilty, that compassion was worth defending even at terrible cost. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed. The space around the Threshold Gate filled with debris and bodies. But slowly, impossibly, the joint fleet began to win. The quantum shields continued to hold. Human and Valorian crews worked together seamlessly, their months of integration translating into effective combat coordination. When the last Karathi ship finally retreated, the joint fleet had lost 80 vessels and 11,000 lives. But they had held the line. The Karathi advance was stopped. News of the victory spread across the galaxy. The species that had mocked humanity's compassion as weakness now watched that compassion manifest as strength. The refugees that had been seen as useless burdens had become valuable allies. The technology born from human-Valorian cooperation had turned the tide of the war. Over the next 8 months, the joint fleet fought in a dozen more battles. They pushed the Karathi back system by system, world by world. The war was long and costly, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Karathi had been stopped. Throughout the conflict, Vess worked in the medical bays treating wounded from both species. She saw humans die protecting Valorians and Valorians die protecting humans. She held the hands of dying soldiers from half a dozen species, offering what comfort she could in their final moments. Kale worked with human scientists to continuously improve the shield technology, adapting to each new Karathi tactic. He barely slept, driven by a need to repay the debt his species owed, not just to humanity, but to the galaxy that had suffered from Valorian aggression. He could not bring back the 3 billion Luminari dead, but he could save others. That was all he had left to offer. When the war finally ended, the victory celebration was muted. Too many had died. Too much had been lost. But there was relief and hope and a sense that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The Galactic Council convened again. This time, Kale stood before them as an official representative of his people. Beside him stood Ambassador Park Doyen, older still, his hair completely white now but unbowed. Together they proposed something new. "We propose the Sanctuary Doctrine," Doyen said. Any species facing extinction or existential crisis may petition the Council for protection. Any species may offer sanctuary without fear of punishment, because we have learned at terrible cost that mercy should never be punished and compassion should never be a crime. The debate was long. Some species argued that the Valorian situation was unique and should not be used to establish broader policy. Others worried about setting precedents that could be abused. But the luminary, who had lost the most and suffered the most, supported the proposal. "We do not forget our dead," Speaker Hillman said. "We will never forget. But we have learned that justice and mercy can exist together, that we can hold people accountable for their crimes while still protecting the innocent. The humans showed us this when we had forgotten it. Let us make sure we never forget again." The vote was not unanimous. 7 species voted against, 4 abstained. But it passed. The sanctuary doctrine became council law. That evening on New Seoul, Kim Hyun-soo and Bai Jina hosted a celebration at their farm. Their table had been expanded over the years to accommodate both families and frequent guests. Tonight, 3 generations of humans and Valorians gathered together. Tiro, now a young adult studying xenobiology at university, translated a traditional Valorian blessing. The words spoke of second chances, of families made from choice rather than blood, of hope born from despair. Around the table, people from 2 different worlds bowed their heads and shared a moment of gratitude. Sear, the mathematician who had once calculated how to weaponize a star and now used those same skills to optimize crop yields, raised a glass. "To the humans," he said in accented but fluent Korean, "who taught us that the greatest strength is not in weapons or technology, but in the choice to extend a hand when everyone else clenches a fist." Junwoo, now working as a teacher like his mother once had, smiled at his childhood friend. "To all of us," he corrected gently. "Human and Valorian. We built this together." Above them, visible through the farmhouse windows, 2 suns set on the horizon. One was the natural sun of New Seoul. The other was a ship, a Valorian vessel hanging in orbit, its running lights bright against the darkening sky. Human and Valorian ships patrolled together now, protecting the colony they shared.